Y nuestra siguiente conferencia está a cargo de Christopher Guith, Senior Vice President Global Energy Institute, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, quien abordará el tema Energía, Infraestructura y el futuro de la inversión regional. Le damos la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso.
Buenos dias. Like she said, my name is Christopher Guith. I manage the U.S. Chamber's Global Energy Institute. As most of you people are very familiar with Chamberland, whether it's domestic chamber, whether it's AmCham or the U.S. Chamber, it's not always easy to find consensus on certain items. But when we do, it's very powerful. And sometimes global events make that even easier for us. So I'm going to start with kind of a big picture and bring it down, but it all has one thread through it, and that's hemispheric cooperation and hemispheric trade. Energy security has always been paramount, but sometimes some people forget. Sometimes they believe their own hubris. Sometimes they just think that history is never going to repeat itself. But if we look back on the global implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it reminded everyone, especially the EU, that energy security is paramount. We saw the European Union become complacent and become dependent on Russia for energy imports to the tune of about 60% of all the oil and gas that was flowing into the continent. And then all of a sudden overnight, after watching newscast after newscast of cruise missiles flying into hospitals and schools, knowing full well that they were funding those armaments, they made the correct decision to diversify away from Russian energy as quickly as possible. 3 years and a few months later, they're still not quite there. It's hard to get that final 20% out of there. But it did make leaders in the capitals across the EU, and in Brussels especially, take a second look at what their overall energy and environment policies were. And when you start to see prices skyrocket to the tune of 4 or 5 times higher than what they are in Asia or the US, industrial companies just can't compete with that. When energy is generally 1 and 2 of their biggest inputs. And when you're paying 4 and 5 times more, it just doesn't work that way. And so we've seen in the subsequent 3 years a significant erosion within the energy union's industrial base to the tune of about 20 to 25%. And then we saw Iran a few months ago. And we've seen the movement of oil and natural gas cut by some 20% globally. We've seen prices skyrocket. As we sit here today, crude's about 50% more than it was before the conflict started. And natural gas is back to its same height where it was post-invasion of Ukraine, at least for importing countries, importing regions, which the EU and much of Asia is. We've seen domestically in the US, we've seen US gasoline prices increase by 35%. And Americans are no different than South Americans or Central Americans or Europeans or Asians. When you see energy prices spike, people start to get really annoyed really quick. And politicians want to respond to that, but they don't always know how, and they don't always have the tools to do that, because the response shouldn't be after the bad event happens. It should be many years, if not decades before, to prevent it from happening to begin with. And thankfully, that's what's happened in the United States. Within a 15-year period, we went from producing 5 million barrels a day and importing another 5 million barrels to now being the largest producer in the world, about to hit 14 million barrels a day this year. That has helped us tremendously during this most recent conflict. Have our prices gone up? Of course. Oil and refined products are a global commodity. But our products haven't gone up as much. And more importantly, we do not have a shortage of the actual physical commodity. If you look at the price of jet fuel in the EU, it's roughly 8 times what is paid in the United States. But the problem for them is they only have a 4-month supply. And so they're going into the summer tour season, they've canceled as many as 10% of their domestic flights because they just don't have access to the commodity at any price. And perhaps more importantly, the U.S. has become the largest producer of natural gas and also the largest exporter of natural gas. Because gas is generally traded on a regional market, not a global market the way crude is, it's really insulated the domestic price in the U.S. So even though we're at a little bit of an uptick right now because of seasonal warmth, we're paying the Europeans are paying more than 4.5 times for the same unit of natural gas as what we're paying. That's a huge competitive advantage for our manufacturers and for our economy. And because we are able to bring significant amount of our gas to other markets, like down here or in the EU, it also helps stabilize their prices. So while the European Union is paying significantly more than we're paying right now, and actually historically high for them, it would have been much higher if the US hadn't gone from 0 to the biggest, largest producer of gas in the world. But I think one thing that remains constant here is that constant of trade. Even though the US is the largest producer of oil in the world, we still import roughly 25% of our crude that gets refined in the US from Canada. I mean, it gets into the different types of crude, and now that Venezuela has increased a fair bit, we're importing more Venezuelan crude, but it gives us a competitive advantage because we can import those types of crude at a discount and then sell them at the same price globally, while we take the oil that we produce and sell it at a premium because it's lighter and it's easier to refine. But that's just one example of the thread through North America and extending into the Southern Hemisphere. And throughout, even though we were reminded that energy security is still paramount, it doesn't mean that we have lost sight of affordability or emissions reductions. But make no mistake, you can't focus on affordability and emissions reductions when you don't have underlying energy security. The good news is that through trade, we can achieve all 3 of these. Regional trade is core to economic growth, and no more so than within the energy trade. The number of products that we trade throughout the Americas, coming from refineries and petrochemical facilities, is astonishing. And it's helped us collectively insulate ourselves from the most significant price shocks that have happened since the conflict in Iran happened, and not only losing 20% of the flow through the Gulf of Hormuz, but also losing some estimated 5% of production capacity through actual kinetic attacks. That's going to take months and years to replace, even when the strait opens up again. I mean, it's a great investment, but that also is a cautionary tale that having that redundancy through trade is critically important. If one source of a critical product that you depend on goes away, what is the backup? Again, throughout the Americas, we have significant production of both oil, natural gas, but also refined products and petrochemical products. That redundancy helps us be insulated. The Western Hemisphere trade is really paramount, as we see China continually acting like a bad actor, illegally dumping products, trying to undermine competition, and ultimately shaking their proverbial trade sword in order to gain geopolitical advantage. As a hemisphere, we must, as they say in English, hang together and understand that that will continue to be a threat. Because make no mistake, when you can make decisions when a government can make decisions within the energy trade based off of its own geopolitical goals, that really makes it an unlevel playing field. Most of the rest of us compete on a very competitive and open market, and that's why prices are lower, That's why innovation continues to increase, why efficiency continues to increase, but we have to keep an eye on the bad actions of countries that will use that geopolitical leverage in order to gain, use their trade leverage in order to gain geopolitical advantages. Within the Americas, we have growing exploration. It's a very underreported story in the United States so far, but I'm sure many of you see it in your respective capitals all the time. I mean, for the United States, we were privileged geologically to, when the borders were set up, to have one of the most prolific oil fields in the world, the Permian Basin. For the last 10 years, it has been a juggernaut. It has helped us increase our production by more than 40%, just one basin in 2 states. But, as with anything geological, it doesn't last forever. So now, companies that explore and produce in the Permian Basin are looking ahead 10 and 15 years. Where is the next market going to be? How are we going to backfill all of this production that we've relied on for the previous 15 years? And they're increasingly looking at South America. Obviously, everybody knows about Argentina, but many of the basins move across country lines. And those geologists are trying to figure out what the next Vaca Muerta is going to be, what the next Permian is going to be. And so while they're very cagey about announcing these things because they're pre-decisional, I talk with members of mine in the oil and gas industry all the time about their interest in developing hydrocarbons in South America, also in the Middle East. And this isn't just your typical super majors. Obviously, they've been in South America for over 100 years, and they continue to have interest there. What is intriguing and perhaps most exciting is we're talking about what we call the independent companies in America who have never operated out of the United States. They're looking at emerging markets where they can take all of the innovation that has happened since the advent of hydraulic fracturing some 15 years ago from a commercial perspective and bring it around the world. And they see South America as a huge potential. And obviously, I don't want to get too far into this and step on the toes of the next panel, but critical minerals is also a very growing potential for trade. I mean, the United States is dependent upon China for roughly 90% of all the critical minerals we use. And even though we're slowly starting to increase our domestic mining because we do have the resource capability or capacity, even when we produce domestically, we're still relying upon China for 90% of the processing of those critical minerals to refine them and turn them into the magnets and the other products that go into all the electronics that we use every single day. So even if we produce this in Utah, we still have to ship it all the way across the Pacific to China and then back to the United States. So there's been a tremendous focus on not only building this domestic resource base, but also friendshoring. Who can we partner with who has either the minerals or the processing capabilities? And the demand for both the minerals and the processing and refining capabilities is growing exponentially, and it's only going to, that rate of increase is only going to get greater. So I think, as we'll hear from the next panel, this is one of the greatest advents for hemispheric trade that helps all of us. The United States has come to a bipartisan conclusion that our dependence on China in this specific space is a huge geopolitical threat. We've seen China use that as a bad actor more than once, where they've completely cut off the ability of the United States to import specific critical minerals, ones that our defense industry depend on to create the defense systems that are being used throughout the Middle East and also being stationed in Asia, because they know they can do it. So what I would say is there's a huge opportunity for all of us to really build this out throughout the hemisphere and make ourselves much more secure within not only the energy side, but also the critical mineral side. And I think it goes without conclusion that trade ties with the US have been strained throughout the world. This too will pass, and I'm very confident that our multilateral relationships will benefit all of our economies and all of our geopolitics. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. It's a phenomenal event, and I look forward to the rest of it.